CryptoCurator. I'm also the content curator for Quantum Economics, and this is Bitcoin Live. Today, I have an exciting panel to help me unpack the 2022 midterm elections, which, as most of you know, is still in progress, and what the results might mean for those of us in the world of Bitcoin. So let's get on with the show. All right, folks, listen, I like to bring on a panel that's going to help me with this show today. But before that, I want to thank our sponsors, RoundlyX. Anytime that you use RoundlyX, your purchases are going to get round up to the next year's dollar and thus going to be saved in Satoshis. So guess what? Go over to roundlyx.com, sign in with Bitcoin and Politics, and you'll get $4 in Bitcoin. Okay, let me go ahead and bring on these three guests. I think you guys are going to get a lot from all three of them. I'm going to learn a lot from them, so hopefully you will too. My first guest is George Leonardo. I would like to bring him on. He's the founder of CapHillCrypto, and I'd like to have him give us a little bit of introduction about who he is.
Hey everyone, hey Paul, thanks for having me back on my second time on Bitcoin Live. Good to be with you again. I know a lot to unpack today. But yeah, a quick intro about me. I'm from Riverside, Rhode Island. Been working recently on building my own website called CapHillCrypto.com with the main goal of providing educational resources on federal crypto policy. So if you guys have time, check it out, CapHillCrypto.com. Two main resources there. One is a legislative tracker. We can find summaries of every crypto-related bill in the 117th Congress. Soon we'll have to update that and get the 118th Congress going, which I'm excited about. And the other resource is a free weekly newsletter on Friday mornings where summarize new bills that have been introduced, hearings that have gone on. But really the main idea is to just provide objective, like hype-free resources. So regardless of where you're coming at these issues, whatever your background is on crypto or policy, you can come away with a good sense of how DC is tackling crypto policy. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Thanks, Paul.
Awesome, man. Thanks. My next guest is going to be Cody Carbone. He's the VP of Policy at the Chamber of Digital Commerce. Let's let him introduce himself.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks for having me on. And George, great to see you again. As Paul said, my name's Cody Carbone. I am the Vice President of Policy at the Chamber of Digital Commerce. If you are unfamiliar with the Chamber, we are the first and largest trade association based right here in DC, where I am, promoting the adoption of blockchain and digital assets. So continuously engaging with policymakers in Washington, across the US, and across the globe to ensure that we have smart policies in place that digital assets and blockchain can grow. The Chamber right now has over 200 members in this space, so a very large and expanding membership. And so we have a loud voice in DC. So really excited. I get excited anytime someone brings up the election. So excited to talk with you guys today about it. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. And last but not least, Chase Kroll. He's the Government Relations and Strategic Communication at Hogan's and Lovells. Hey, Chase, how's it going, man?
Hey, Paul, doing well. Thank you for having me on today. Good to be with you and Cody and George. Especially happy to join this panel because those two guys can field all the tough questions. A little bit about me and my background. I'm a lobbyist at Hogan Lovells. Hogan Lovells is the world's largest regulatory law firm. We've got offices in 27 countries, like 45 offices in 27 countries. We've got a big footprint here in Washington, D.C. We're actually the largest law firm headquartered in D.C. So we've got a big, D.C. presence, a big lobbying and public policy presence, and that's where I sit. I used to work on the Hill. I ran financial services for a high-profile member on the Hill, and then did lobbying for a little while at small shops, my own shops, and then kind of brought that into Hogan Lovells. Do a fair bit of financial services lobbying here at Hogan Lovells, including some clients in crypto, and our clients do work with Cody over at Digital Blockchain or Digital Chamber. So happy to be with you guys. Look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So folks, as you can see, we have a wealth of knowledge here that's going to help us unpack this 2022 election. Each of these guys come from a different angle. We have one that, of course, involved with the political campaign itself. We have another that was actually working with one of the associations, and then another that's on the lobbying side. So hopefully all three of these guys can give us a different aspect of what's going on with this election. So let's turn to the big picture. Balance of power is the big topic today, and it's still not decided. Right now, the Senate is sitting at 49 on the Republican side, 48 on the Democratic side. On the House side, we have 192 Democratic seats filled, and we have 209 on the Republican side filled. But for you guys, what do you think will happen once this is all done? And what would it mean for Bitcoin and the broader crypto industry as it relates to policy? So I'd like to hear from each one of you guys. Cody, let's start with you, and then we'll switch it over to Chase, and then we'll let, I don't know, I'm blanking. George go last, sorry.
Yeah, happy to start. So as you said, we're probably not going to know what's final for a while. I think it's pretty clear at this point that the House is going to flip and Republicans will take control of the House. I think we're just waiting right now on what that final margin is going to be for their majority. I think the Senate is what's going to take so long to figure out. We may have another 50-50 split depending what happens in some of those outstanding races in Nevada and Georgia. And Arizona. And if it comes down to Georgia again, we're not going to know until their runoff election in December. So either way, with the House likely flipping to Republican, we're going to have some form of divided government here in Washington. What does that mean? It means there's going to be a need for compromise. And if there's a divided Congress, and say we have a 50-50 split in the Senate, Democrats retain control of the Senate, and we have a Republican House, they're going to have to find legislative wins somehow. They can't go 2 years until the next presidential election in 2024 without passing any legislation because there are partisan differences. So where will they look? They'll look for places that are nonpartisan or they have bipartisan bills. That immediately, for me, turns to crypto. A lot of these proposals, and I know that we'll talk later in the show about them, have been introduced with sponsors from Democrats, from Republicans. This is still a nonpartisan issue in Washington. So if they're looking for quick and easy wins, I know there's a lot to make sure a lot to go to make sure some of these bills improve. But if they're looking early in the term next year, they're going to look to crypto because they already have bipartisan support. So I think that's an opportunity for crypto to get some of these legislative proposals passed.
Gotcha. Chase?
Yeah, Paul, I would add just a couple of things. I totally agree with what Cody said. I'd add a couple of things just on timing with the elections, just add a little bit of granularity. For example, in Nevada, a lot of clients are frustrated because they don't know why it takes so long to call a race in Nevada, whereas a state like Florida, which has a large population, they called races at like 8:02 p.m. In Nevada, they get to count ballots that were date stamped at least by November 8th, election day, and then received through Saturday, November 12th. And then they can count them for another 5 days. So in theory, they could be collecting ballots through Saturday night that are date stamped by the election day, and then count them through the next several days. And then we can find out finally on Thursday what the final number is. So you got to kind of buckle up, wait a week for Nevada. And then like Cody said, Georgia's going to a runoff on December 6th, which will likely, give us the balance of power in the Senate, assuming, Senator Kelly retains his seat in Arizona, which seems kind of hard to tell, but probably likely. Yes, totally agree with what Cody said about, bipartisan legislation, and crypto is kind of one of the attractive ones to do that. The other thing is just frankly, standalone bills are going to be really, really hard to pass. And so I think a big sort of strategic thing for the crypto industry and for crypto-friendly legislators is to figure out, okay, what are the bipartisan bills or provisions? And then how do we tack them on to must pass? So like next year, you've got annual appropriations, you've got the defense bill every year, the NDAA. And then you've got things like FAA, a big reauth, which probably won't have many hooks for crypto, but there's also a farm bill. And so especially the sort of ag-centric crypto legislators who want to push stuff, it's probably gonna be a big push to tack that on to an ag bill, because that's got to pass next year too.
Awesome. So George, since you come from the side where you actually worked for a senator, when you look at this race, both of these guys are saying that we probably still have a divided government. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the one conclusion. We're going to see divided government. And however, it's important to remember, however the House and Senate shake out, President Biden's still there, right? And so you're going to need him to sign any law that passes Congress. One thing, just taking a step back of why the majorities matter as well, in addition to being able to set the agenda for the House and Senate floor, a lot of like the nitty gritty policy making, like turning ideas into actual legislative language, happens at committee levels. And so one important thing to keep in mind, whatever party controls the majority gets to also control the committees. So that's one thing I'm keeping an eye on. I think Cody touched on this a little bit. Like it's looking like the House will flip to Republican, although it will be a small majority overall. But one thing that's significant, I think, is if you look at like Financial Services Committee, it's looking likely that you'll have a chair and Patrick McHenry, who's been a leader on not just crypto, but he's got several bipartisan crypto initiatives, and he's taken upon himself to be a leader specifically on stablecoins. So interesting to see, if that helps facilitate any stablecoin legislation in the next Congress. But also, if you look at the Ag Committee, if that flips, you'll see Rep. Glenn Thompson become the chair, and that puts him in the driver's seat on House Ag. As Chase mentioned, Farm Bill is going to take a lot of time. It's a big bill for the Ag community. So it'll be interesting to see him. He's got his own crypto bills that he sponsored, including the Digital Commodity Exchange Act. I think we might talk about that a little bit later. So again, too much in the weeds. It'll be interesting to see, with the committees changing, how priorities shift and how that dynamic balances out with a Democrat Senate.
Yeah. So, again, how this all shakes out with this election cycle and Congress coming together, the hopes is that we can have policymakers that will come to the table specifically as it looks at the crypto legislation, and that something will get passed. And I believe Cody had mentioned this, but as you guys look at the swath of bills that are there, do you see any of them that you think will be the bill to actually advance? And I don't know if you've looked at them and have considered which ones those might be, but maybe George, do you have an idea of if we were to see this Congress come together and it is in fact divided, let's just say Republicans take a clean sweep of both the House and the Senate, do you think that there's still going to be legislation passed?
So you mean in the lame duck or in next Congress in 118?
Yeah, 118.
So 118th, yeah, I think that the main issues you hear talked about and that are the most focused that people would like to see get done. One is stable coins, but also this issue of regulatory clarity, where we can have a clear idea of how digital assets are going to be treated, like are they going to be subject to securities laws and everything that comes with that, or is it going to be a CFTC regime or a CFTC that has the majority oversight of crypto and the crypto spot market. So I think those are the two main things. This year all the focus is on DCCPA, a Senate bill. Interesting to see, what happens with that after the FTX collapse. But I think next year, it really will be, everything will have to be bipartisan. And again, with the dynamics on the committee, we'll see stablecoins and some version of regulatory clarity. Hopefully that gets passed.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm going to say some gibberish right now that some of the viewers might think that I'm talking a different language. But when you say DCCPA and DCEA, HR 8730, HR 8950, S4760, these are a lot of numbers. These are a lot of bills. It seems like this is just all over the place. Can you guys help us sort of unpack what's happening around this particular legislation? Maybe again, George, start with you, switch over to Cody, and then go over to Chase. Yeah, sure.
So, the DCCPA is the acronym for Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act. It was a Senate Ag bill. And importantly, it had the support of the chairwoman of the Senate Ag Committee and the ranking member of the Ag Committee. So I know Sam's getting a lot of the credit for this bill, but at the end of the day, he's not a member of Congress, and the staff on the Senate Ag Committee has worked really hard on this bill. So I don't think it just kind of disappears. Whatever happens with that bill, there's been a lot of work put into it. And so I think in some form or fashion, that'll carry over, hopefully addressing, drilling down on some of the consumer protection issues that might be able to prevent something like this from happening, but also very importantly, distinguishing between decentralized finance and centralized finance, right, which is one of the critiques of the DCCPA. So hoping, that gets worked out, and if some good comes from this situation, hopefully it helps, provide a sense of urgency for providing consumer protections and regulatory clarity but also, highlighting the role that transparent, decentralized finance protocols can provide and some of the advantages that come with that. But I've been talking a lot, so I want to kick it over to Cody and Chase to talk a little bit about some of the other bills out there.
Sure.
I'll just add.
No, go ahead, Cody.
I was going to add, it is really confusing. There are a lot of acronyms. There's 74 bills, I think, introduced this Congress that have some relation to digital assets and blockchain. That's a lot. A lot of those bills aren't going anywhere. They're just messaging bills. People want to put their stake in the ground and say, oh, I'm interested in crypto, and I'll introduce a bill that I know it's not going anywhere, but I want to show that I am interested in this issue and I want to introduce a bill. That happens. There are very few bills that have chance of passing. And there are some of these really, really large bills. And I want to go back to a point Chase made earlier. And, it's the DCCPA, it's the DCA, DCEA, the digital, and I'm already tripping myself up on these acronyms. It's a stablecoin draft in the House Financial Services Committee. These really large bills that make a lot of noise because they're very comprehensive. The Lummis-Gillibrand bill is another one. The reason they make so much noise is because they cover so much of the industry. And they would really impact the way the industry is regulated right now. However, bills that are 60, 70, 100 pages long, as Chase mentioned earlier, are really hard to pass. It's really hard to get support for all of the different provisions from 60 members in the Senate and a majority in the House for all the different provisions that are in that bill. So I think the best path forward for crypto legislation may not be one of these big bills we're talking about right now. It may be certain provisions of the DCCPA, of the DCEA, of the Lummis-Gillibrand that are tacked on to some other must-pass bills. Because passing a bill of that size, getting the full support, and then just getting the floor time for a standalone crypto bill is just really hard in Washington right now, given all of the other priorities they have going on.
Right. So Chase, did you write part of those bills? Because from what I've been told is that the lobbyists actually write most of these bills in conjunction with these associations. Like the members themselves do not write the bills.
I've got an old boss who used to say a joke that I would never repeat, but it's that it may be that the members get the credit, we get the checks. So no, I didn't write anything. It's all the members and all the staff. Two small bills I think could get tacked on to stuff that we haven't really mentioned yet is a bill to fix the broker provision. Like Mr. McHenry has the one, 6006, I think, HR 6006. That's super popular. It has bipartisan and bicameral support. I could see that getting tacked on to something. Probably not in the lame duck because it's just going to get shortened because of the Georgia runoff and everything's going to be. They're going to be festooning these bills with random amendments. So it probably won't happen in a lame duck, but that can get thrown into a different tax package next year. Because I think there will be support for a tax package for like housing and R&D credits. And then why not just throw that in there too? The other thing, crypto related, I think we should watch for a smaller bill is the I'll make sure I get this right. The Virtual Currency Tax Fairness Act. There's a House version and a Senate version. One of them has a cap at like $200. One of them is like, I think, $50. So basically exempt reporting requirements for small transactions of cryptocurrencies. I think that could be very popular and that could get thrown on. So yeah, the big bills like Lummis-Gillibrand, I think are multi-year efforts. In the meantime, I like that. I think industry and members are pushing to get some smaller wins along the way. So I think that's what we should look for as well.
Yeah, George,
one thing
you were
to add,
talking
Paul,
about
real
that.
quick.
Yeah, you were talking about that, and we were saying the fact that you had mentioned that to me before. It was something about the NDA, right? You were saying that some of these bills might get tacked on there.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the specific ones Chase mentioned, but there are amendments that have been filed to the NDA, and it's kind of good, as we've been talking about a little bit, a good lesson kind of in process of how it works, where it can be really hard to get one standalone bill to move. So the National Defense Authorization Act has to move, a government funding bill has to move by December 16th, or I guess it's on half, the government could shut down, but these are the deadlines we're watching. And so there's a lot of bills, as Cody mentioned, that's like not even non-controversial stuff sometimes where, it's just a study here, little smaller things that no one's it's not gonna get floor time on its own, but something like the NDA where it's non-controversial, what will happen is usually leadership or members who are interested in the bills will work out a deal where you get it filed as an amendment, and especially non-controversial ones, no one really stands in the way, so they're able to pass. But some examples I saw get filed for the NDA was the ACES Act, the study to see what's going on in El Salvador by the State Department and report on that. The bills like Senator Lummis bill, the research on distributed ledger technology. So whether these get added on, remains to be seen. But a good example of process and the fact that there's a lot that I think gets overlooked because all the focus is on the bigger bills, but there is work being done by legislators and their staff to get kind of smaller victories along the way where they can get them.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys again mentioned that. I wrote up a blog post and I was outlining how much legislation there's currently pending in Congress. The members that we had, there were 105 members of Congress that were sponsoring or co-sponsoring legislation that applied to crypto assets or blockchain technology. And there's 34 pieces of legislation that's focused on just crypto assets, 8 on blockchain and 9 on CBDCs and eCash. So it's going to be very interesting to see what part of this, and again, that's thanks to your legislative tracker, I was able to gather all that information. It's going to be interesting to see which pieces can actually get attached, which pieces move forward in this crazy session. I don't know if you guys have been paying much attention, but the members that ran for office this time, those that got elected, some of them are supporting Bitcoin, some of them aren't. Are there any members that you guys have looked at or paid attention to, or that citizens should be paying attention to either focus to reach out to them or to watch what they do when it comes to policy?
Paul, I'll jump in.
I don't know if anyone guys. I don't know.
I'll jump in with a few thoughts. In part, sidestepping your question a little bit and talking about Ron DeSantis, just because I think look, Tuesday night was he was probably the biggest winner, and so it got me really thinking. Okay, where is he on crypto? Because he might be the front runner now for the GOP nomination for the 2024 presidential election. And so, he's very open, very receptive to the industry. Earlier this year, he signed a bill really streamlining regulations in Florida and making it so that individuals could sell cryptocurrencies without getting a license. But, the exchanges still have to get their MTL in Florida. And then the other thing, to watch with Mr. DeSantis, Governor DeSantis, is that he is part of that Republican bloc that's really skeptical of a central bank digital currency. It really cuts both ways in the party. And he's one of the guys that thinks that a CBDC, could be a tool for federal surveillance. So he's kind of with industry on the fact that, he wants it to be streamlined, sort of smart regulations, let individuals, kind of do what they want to do with their own assets. Skeptical of CBDCs. Frankly, I don't really know where he's at as far as privately issued stablecoins, but be curious to watch as his issues probably evolve as he goes for a more national platform.
Well, Chase, he's got company, though, because, granted, he's a governor, and I haven't paid a lot of attention to governors, but he's a governor that thinks that way. But we've got Senator Ted Cruz here in Texas who does think that way as well. He actually has pending legislation that says no CBDCs. In addition, we've got James Lankford, right? James Lankford said the same thing. And I think you're going to see some of these Republican, and I'm sorry, that's the way it shakes out right now, that are pushing against this CBDC, whereas you got most of the Democrats who are pushing for this, at least studying of a CBDC or trying to bring one to market. It can be really, really tricky. And again, Cody and George, I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that, but yeah, it's interesting to see that sort of angle shake out.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think the CBDC narrative right now has started to evolve into partisan camps. There are Democrats who are more open to the idea of a CBDC as they see some foreign counterparts moving forward. But, as in the industry and as some Republicans have communicated, there needs to be serious conversations before launching anything related to a CBDC on privacy and surveillance. And so right now, we're just not comfortable having that conversation until there is more research done and there is more transparency and collaboration with the government. And as Republicans have said, I think there was a letter from Ranking Member McHenry of the House Financial Services Committee and Congressman Emmer or Huizinga, but it was to the DOJ and it was to the chairman of the Fed saying, hey, before the US government moves forward with the CBDC, there needs to be congressional approval. We need affirmation that there will be congressional approval. And I think that's exactly right. So I am hoping that the Biden administration follows suit with that before they move forward.
Nice.
Yeah, just echo what everyone said, and definitely CBDC does seem to be the most polarizing issue when it comes to crypto. A lot of the other areas, I think, seems to be more bipartisan agreement around. But yeah, I'll just echo what Cody said. I think, you'd love to see from a process standpoint a little more clear guidance from Congress saying we officially authorize that. And initially, you even heard that from the Federal Reserve themselves. But it's unclear, is it a bill? Is it some type of resolution, or what exactly is it going to take? Obviously I'm biased because I worked in Congress, but I always like to see the legislature take the leading role on that. But definitely something to keep an eye on going forward, because as you mentioned, I think it is an issue that gets people excited one way or the other.
Hey, Paul, one other race that I'm watching with bated breath is Arizona 1. It's David Schweikert's district. He was like an early pro-crypto guy. I used to work alongside him when he was on Financial Services Committee, and now he's really an influential member on Ways and Means, and like a co-chair of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus. And out of nowhere, he's trailing in his race, I think, with like 75% of precincts reporting. I think he'll be fine, but it'd be suboptimal to see him go. He's a great member on these issues.
It really would be a shame to see him go, because I agree with you. Through all of the curation of news that I collect, his name pops up time and time and again, right, with Emmer and everybody else. But, as I was looking at the race, I wrote a piece again previewing this. And then as a result, looking at it, I had broken it down into those who sponsored legislation, to those who co-sponsored, and who won and who lost. And of those that sponsored, nearly everyone, actually everyone did win on the House side. The Senate side, the same thing. Now, we have some members that are not up for a re-election until 2027, 2025. They're in a different class. We have some that they're not going to run. People like Representative McNerney, Bobby Rush, Hollingsworth, Lynch. So like some of these guys, folks, they're just not going to run again. On the co-sponsor side, that's where we start to see some losses. And David is one of them. Right now, the race is too close to call, but he's leaning toward losing. We've got Representative Kim in California, too close to call. Boebert was too close to call. Some of these, I think, might have switched by now, and I think maybe they did, in fact, win or lose. I did not go back and update that. But it's interesting to watch those that are currently advocating for Bitcoin. And I think Schweikert might be one of the only ones who's at a point of losing, whereas everyone else, for the most part, has won. Does anybody else stand out to you guys as being a critical Bitcoin supporter who lost?
Well, someone who didn't lose but is retiring is Senator Toomey. And, I think one thing also to point out is, like, not only has been a leader in sponsorships and co-sponsorships, but just more generally, sponsorships, co-sponsorships, that's kind of a good shorthand way to see how much support a bill has and where a member feels on certain issues. But a lot of times there are members who might support a bill, but they don't put their name on it. Some people have a conservative philosophy, or some members, have a conservative philosophy where they only put their name on something if they're really going to like champion it and really make a push for it. But so there's like other ways you can make an impact. And one of those ways I think Senator Toomey was really effective was just with messaging. I think it was consistently evident at hearings, the way he could kind of explain what admittedly can be a complicated technology. And he was able to do it in a way that's rare, especially amongst lawmakers, in terms of highlighting some of the advantages and why this new technology is different from traditional securities. But just more generally, some of the pros of the technology. So I think he will be missed. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has thoughts.
I don't know if I saw any champions lose in this space, but I think with the results of the election so far, there's an opportunity to gain even more champions. So with Republicans taking over the House, there's going to be about, I don't know, correct me, like 8 to 10 new members on the House Financial Services Committee from the Republican side. That's going to be 8 to 10 new members who maybe have been interested in this space, but haven't fully focused on it. And now we're going to get to focus on it full time. Like crypto is going to be at them all the time, whether it's, blockchain or Bitcoin or whatever. They're going to be focused on this. And that's an opportunity for us to go in and make sure they are educated. So they are going to be a big time advocate for this space. Similarly, in the Senate, no matter what happens, as George just mentioned, Senator Toomey is retired. And so he was the leader of the Republican side of the Senate Banking Committee. That's likely going to go to Senator Tim Scott right now, who hasn't been very vocal on Bitcoin or crypto more generally. There's an opportunity to continue, and I know the industry is working on this right now, but to continue to go in there and to educate, to make sure that he continues some of the good work that Senator Toomey has and advocates for this technology. So there's just going to be, I can't think of anyone that's lost overnight that is, is going to be detrimental to the industry. I mean, if Schweikert loses, that would be pretty bad. But there's a new opportunity. The way I'm spinning it in my head, there's a new opportunity to make some more champions out of this.
Well, you mentioned that from the existing incumbents, I would agree with you, but I will say, and I'm surprised you guys haven't brought it up, is that on the candidate side, we had some huge Bitcoin people that are in trouble. Blake Masters, right? JD Vance, right? You've got some of these guys. Now, JD Vance he did win. So do you think he's going to be able to advocate strongly for Bitcoin while he's in there? And if Blake Masters happens to get in, do you think he's going to be a great voice for Bitcoin while he's in there?
I think both will be great on the issues, especially once Cody goes in there and educates them in the office. I think the interesting thing about that Ohio race is that Tim Ryan was like a pretty good Bitcoin guy in the House. In fact, he co-sponsored McHenry's bill. I think before he ran for what I would call as a former House guy, the lower chamber. But that's another thing. And then Masters, I think he'll be really, really effective as a sort of young, energetic, obviously a tech guy. If he can pull it off in Arizona, it'd be fun to see him in the Senate.
Yeah, I don't think it will.
Yeah, I think anyone you can get in there with experience with Bitcoin or using these technologies and just having, even if nothing else, effective messaging in there. We'll take all the help we can get.
Especially in the Senate. I mean, they've already cleared such a hurdle that they know what Bitcoin is, and not only do they know what Bitcoin is, but they're invested in Bitcoin and they understand how it works. And it's like in the Senate right now, usually when you go in, you have to start from, step one and saying, this is what Bitcoin is, and like go through the 101. Having them already have that knowledge, that foundational knowledge, is such a win for the industry. So they can easily be champions for us.
Yeah, you mentioned holding Bitcoin. So again, that's one of the metrics that I looked at. And in the Senate, there's only 4 people that was holding Bitcoin, so to speak. Blake Masters, if he wins, he'll be there. You got JD Vance, of course, he won. Ted Cruz, he holds Bitcoin, and Senator Lummis, she holds Bitcoin. I don't know if you guys know of any other senators that actually hold Bitcoin. I would love to know and to hear that. But the same thing, are you guys aware of other members of Congress who actually hold Bitcoin, or is it more that they just advocate for
it? That's a good question. I would say another interesting way to look at it too is their fundraising. Like, Tom Emmer solicited fundraising through crypto. I think Dana Rohrabacher was like one of the earliest guys to do it back in the day when he was in the House. But that's another interesting metric. I don't know if I can know who holds it or not right now, but it's interesting to see. You can pretty quickly figure out who is soliciting it for campaign fundraising.
Yeah.
Let
me ask a question.
Sure. I think. Sorry, I was going to say. I'm not sure how public the information is of who holds what. I imagine there's a place you can get that information. But it is interesting. It raises another question, another issue that's come up is sometimes you hear pushback where some people don't want members of Congress to hold crypto who are working on it. They say it's a conflict of interest. I know there's a lot of pushback. I think there was the White House came out with like people working on these issues that government agencies aren't supposed to hold them. And I think especially something where, I'll admit I've been started going on a rabbit hole like end of last year, so I'm relatively early, but I still have a lot to learn. So, my hope, in some way owning it will give you an interest in the sense that you're educated on it and will get a better understanding of how these tools can be used. It might make the policy more informed. So I know that can be a controversial take, but I know it's an issue that has come up, so I wanted to flag it.
And Paul, I'll just flag.
Yeah,
so this is before I was going to say, before I joined the chamber, we did something at the end of 2020 where it was called Crypto for Congress. And we actually sent $50 in Bitcoin to every member of Congress. And so I'll need to find for you exactly how many members accepted that Bitcoin. But we did this as an opportunity to help educate them on Bitcoin. And we actually got great results. We had great conversations from it. It was before my time, though, so I would love to get you the numbers, follow up to see how many members actually accepted that Bitcoin.
Yeah, that'll be great. I'm glad you brought that up, because here's a point that I was going to bring up and mention to George, and maybe he can give me some insight. A couple of things when it comes to this. One of the ways I was able to tell who actually held Bitcoin was from financial disclosures. But I'm not sure from what I was able to gain if they're required to do that, or is that just a nice to do? Because it seems like some members did and other members didn't. And it seemed like some talked about they might have had Bitcoin, but there were no financial disclosures to prove that. And I got that from Jameson Lop. If you go to lop.net, you can look at Bitcoin politicians, and he has a list of people based on their financial disclosures if they actually own Bitcoin or not. Now, if you guys sent Bitcoin to all of them, they accepted it, do they have to report that, or is it a nominal piece that they don't have to consider? So, George?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know there are rules governing like ethics procedures for members and what they have to disclose. I'm not sure off the top of my head what those are, but could look those up. Another question is, I imagine they were written before, or weren't necessarily written recently, so maybe there's like not necessarily specific clarity as to whether or to what extent cryptocurrencies have to be reported. But you can also think just kind of like, in a good faith effort, transparency is usually best. So hopefully people would want to disclose that. And the other thing is, if the policymaking process is being done in a transparent way, like any conflicts of interest that might result from what you're holding should become evident in like the policy itself, right? You should be able to see like, oh, this isn't good for A, B, and C reason, and then you can argue it on those grounds. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I get that. And we got a little late start, but I do want to wrap up with a couple questions that maybe you guys can help me understand. One of them is going to be around, and I forget who actually came up with this point, but they said that, and maybe it was, I think it was, might be from the chamber, Perry Ann Boring might have said this, but one day no, I didn't say one day. I think she said our next president is going to be a Bitcoiner. Do you guys think that's possible? Do you think the next president is going to be a Bitcoiner?
I think they'll have to be, or at least let me phrase it this way. I think that Bitcoin, blockchain technology, digital assets more broadly will have to be part of every 2024 candidate's platform. Whether that shakes out and we vote in a Bitcoiner, I don't know. But given, the amount of bills that, you've gone through and that George has on his, legislative tracker, it's becoming mainstream. We had an executive order just focused on digital assets earlier this year from the White House. Other countries are moving forward with regulatory guardrails. This is becoming mainstream. It's becoming part of our economy and our financial services system. And so I think that every 2024 candidate is going to have some kind of opinion related to Bitcoin and digital assets more broadly on their platform.
What do you think, Chase? Think that's true?
If they're not Bitcoiners, they're at least be Bitcoin curious. I totally agree. And like, just to amplify Cody's sort of later points, it's becoming a necessity just because of international parity. We don't want to lose these races to other countries. And as they're advancing, it becomes a national security imperative that we advance as well.
Yeah, 100%
George?
agree. I think it's becoming more and more mainstream. Even just like reading the paper more and more, you can see it comes up, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, whatever you're reading. More and more to the front page, crypto is becoming an issue that people have to stay on top of. And I think constituents are asking more questions about. So you highlighted a lot of this, Paul, and more, even in this cycle where member or candidates were posting their website positions on Bitcoin or crypto generally. And, I think the momentum's heading in the right direction.
Yeah. So when I get to thinking about all of this legislation that's going on, and I think about the voting public, how do we really become effective at helping these members of Congress make a decision? Because from my perspective, the way I think government should run is that these are representatives. They're representing us. We tell them sort of what we would like, and then they sort of carry that mantle based on the majority. What can we do as average citizens to help? Or is it out of our hands? Is it only in the hands of, the associations like the chamber, like lobbyists, like yourself? How do you guys think that we can take action?
I think there needs to be a louder public voice on the utility of some of these technologies. Right now, I think so many people have gone into Washington and they've gone into legislators' offices and they've tried to educate on the technology. That doesn't work. That doesn't sell. Legislators really care about how their constituents are going to vote. Will it bring tax revenue or jobs to their district? It's cynical, but that's really what they care about. So when we talk about this technology and the innovation behind it, we really need to talk about the utility. Why is it going to improve the lives of their constituents? And why will guardrails or regulation or legislation help make that innovation flourish that will improve their lives, that if they were to vote a certain way, their constituents would thank them for that and vote them and keep them in office, or it'll bring jobs to their district. So we need to do a better job in talking about the use cases and the utility around this and not so much the technology. Anytime you go in their technology, it usually goes right over their head. And to be frank, I advocate and I do this on a daily basis, and it goes over my head a lot of the times. I use the internet every single day. I have no idea how the internet works. And a lot of lawmakers who are regulating the internet right now or legislating the internet would tell you the same thing. But they can tell you why they use the internet and why people use the internet and why it makes their lives better and how many jobs, internet, data centers have brought to their district. That's what matters. So we need to do a better job in highlighting those use cases and utility.
Nice. Chase, any thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Cody said. And, some of the examples we use when we talk, particularly the Democrat offices, is just the power of the full value transactions. And as that's seen through remittances. I mean, remittances can be just totally transformed through blockchain technology and through cryptocurrencies. So we think that's a really powerful use case to tell some of our offices. And then those constituents, even better than coming from a lobbyist, is to have those constituents tell their members about how they're using these technologies to give, remittances back home. It's really powerful.
Gotcha. George?
Yeah, it's a great question because, one of the reasons why I'm glad I worked on the Hill is because before I went there, I had questions myself of, how effective is like constituent outreach, or, how much does it really matter? How much is it really controlled by lobbyists or whatnot? But one thing I was struck by, I'm really glad I worked on the Hill, is really just how accessible it was. I mean, I spent 90% of my day like taking meetings with constituents or, lobbyists or a combination thereof, hearing their concerns and passing it along. 100% agree that ideally the best messaging you can get to pass along to the senator and get them to sign on to something is if you can point to specific utility, and jobs is always a big one to jump on. Just maybe to give people like a concrete example of what they could do to make a difference. Policy is kind of squeak wheel gets the grease. Obviously people want to get elected. So the more you can present kind of a unified front with numbers when you're meeting with folks, and obviously not everyone can make it all the way to DC, but members all have offices in their respective districts, centers, throughout the state, they'll have offices. So maybe, I know like especially the Bitcoin community are big on meetups. Maybe you get your folks together as a group and you can kind of go meet with someone in a local office. And one thing I remember someone told me early on when I started on the Hill was like, the trick to being a really good lobbyist, and I'm sure Chase has this written down somewhere in like tip number 1 for his job, but it's like you want to be present, but you don't want to be annoying. And that can be really hard. So you don't want to be a nuisance to people. And so one way to kind of get around that is really present yourself as a resource to folks, because I think there is curiosity for people working on policy to understand this better. And so to the extent, you kind of go in, you meet with them and you say, look, if anything comes up and you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're in the weeds on this. We can help you guys out. And then it's less like you're asking them and you're there just to help, and you get that dialogue going and can build that relationship. I know, the relationships I built when I was working on the Hill, and the people I thought were the most effective at advocacy were people I built a relationship with and felt like I could trust to go to them with questions I had.
Yeah, you've done a great job at that with your resource, the legislative tracker. I'm sure that it's very useful for a lot of folks. And again, I try to encourage the average person to look at it because, like I said before, it sounds like gibberish, but all of these build numbers, trying to make sense of what they mean, trying to understand who's sponsored, who's co-sponsored, who to reach out to, who not to reach out. I mean, it's a huge task, but the beauty of it is that you sort of make that easy. So that's awesome. I do have one question. When you look at the industry as a whole, and I'm talking the whole political engine and how it works and how it operates, rather that's associations, rather it's lobbyists, or rather it's even the campaigns themselves moving things forward. Why do you guys see a way for digital assets to truly be impactful in the next big election? And then going forward, how long will it take before we get, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank said, when we get friendly regulation for this, that's when it takes off. When do you guys think that's going to happen? Is that possible to happen in the next 2024 election, or will it take 2026 or 2028 before that happens? And we can, anyone of you can start. Maybe not.
Paul, I'll say I think that a big turning point, an inflection point, was the infrastructure bill in 2021 when they stuck that $27 billion pay for the broker provision in the bill. Because I think before that, so much in the crypto community thought that they could stay outside of politics and politicians would stay outside of their industry. And they're like, oh boy, not anymore. And then members were like, oh, wow, this is a huge revenue raiser. So then the industry woke up. They lobbied well, they lobbied effectively. A lot of it was sort of hodgepodge and pell-mell, but they raised the alarm, and it was kind of effective. And I think now that broker provision is going to get fixed. But the evolution from going from that to like, oh shit, we got to do something, to comprehensive regulatory definitions is going to take several years. And that's why I think just in the meantime, we can get some singles and doubles, and we can get some smaller bills passed, and then, just continue the education across the hill. And then hopefully, maybe it's 2025, maybe it's 2026, we get really, really good comprehensive legislation to guide the regulatory landscape for the industry.
I think that. Yeah. I was just going to say, I think that's a great point. I would echo everything Chase said. I think right now there is a desire from everyone in the industry to hit a home run, and they want to have it all regulatory clarity swept up in one big bill or one, big document. And that's just not how Washington works. And so I think that as soon as the industry as a whole can start to understand that games are won by singles and doubles, or even walks, like it just can be, you got to play the slow game here, and start to have narrow pieces of legislation or narrow regulatory proposals that just focus on one small issue versus trying to get, the whole kit and caboodle in one big swoop. It's not how Washington works. So we really need to focus on those singles and doubles, to use Chase's analogy. I think that's really smart. And I do think, over the next few years, we'll start to get into a much better place. I think that can start in January. I think we'll start to get some smaller bills hopefully passed. But I think until we're in a completely comfortable place where we said, okay, I feel like this is a safe and consistent regulatory regime, it is probably going to take a few years.
Yeah, unfortunately, people in crypto, we like things fast, right? Win moon, win Lambo. Go ahead, George. You can round us out.
Yeah, no, I think that's all right. I definitely agree with everything that's been said. Maybe just add, I think it's important to remember. It's more important, I think. I'd rather see Washington get it right than just get something done for the sake of getting something done. So, in a way, having a little more time just gives us more time for the education of that to get there, and have policies that are helpful and actually provide the regulatory clarity that people want. Because I do think, there's not many people I know who have like gone down the rabbit hole and come out the other side, and take for the example Chase brought up with, remittances. Like, how many people are like, oh no, I don't think it's a good idea that you should be able to send money and like internationally to family and, be able to do that more cheaply than you can do right now. Right. So like the more this kind of gets back to the use cases. But the more we can kind of build out the pros of the technology and take our time to get it right, I think that's more important than just getting something done for the sake of speed and getting it done.
Nice. All right, guys. Hey, listen, thank you for giving me your time. I really appreciate this. You three have a lot going on that I think that will definitely help move this industry forward in a good way, because in crypto, a lot of us were slash and burn and cut and tear it down, right? But I think that there's ways of doing this to where it's beneficial and that it really can be helpful. And I know that crypto people are anti-government. We hate government. We want it destroyed, but I think that there is a way to do it in a great way. So if each of you guys would tell folks how to follow you more so they can learn more about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and maybe they might be able to help you, if you can share that information, we'd appreciate it. We'll start with you, George, and then we'll work around to Chase, and then finally Cody.
Sorry, Paul, you cut out on my end. Do you mind? Maybe we can start with Cody, and I can pick up the question from their answers.
Sure, absolutely. Cody.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So please go and look at our website, the Chamber of Digital Commerce. I believe it's digitalchamber.org. You can find out a lot of our resources there. All of our consultative responses, our comment letters, and a lot that we're doing on education is on that website. You can also follow me on Twitter at CodyCarboneDC. I'm always tweeting, very active in the DC crypto space. So would love to engage with you there, but please go to our website to find out more information and see the rest of our team.
Awesome.
The website for the firm is hoganlovells.com. Big law firm. If you're in legal trouble, hit us up. If you need lobbyists, reach out. On Twitter, I'm Chase_Kroll. It'd be great to be in touch. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, so much for having me. Thanks, Bitcoin Live, for putting this together. Appreciate you guys making this resource available to everyone. So my website's CapHillCrypto.com. Love it if you check it out, especially sign up for the newsletter every Friday morning. All the resources are free. Again, keep it very objective. I try to cite to everything I'm analyzing, so you can do your own research. Also on Twitter at CapHillCrypto. Feel free to reach out. Love getting connected to folks, learn about what you all are working on. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Hey, thank you guys again once for being on the show. Nick, thanks for producing this. We ran into some horrible technical difficulties, but I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me to sort of muddle through this. Maybe in the future, the next show I have, we can redo this at some point. We can talk about the 2024 election. So thanks a lot, guys. And you guys have a great day. Thanks, everybody, for watching.